Welcome to Zenith Global News.
Trump's Iran brinkmanship reaches truce, escalates backlash at home. Trump put the tactic to the riskiest test yet with Tuesday's ultimatum that a whole civilization will die tonight, which yielded a 2-week ceasefire in Iran and an assurance that the country's leaders would let oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. Supporters said the outcome demonstrated that Trump's method worked. President Trump is doing what he does, Andrew Calvet, host of The Charlie Kirk Show, said on the air Tuesday, before Trump announced the suspension of strikes on Iran. This is why he is the elected president. I think he's lucid and in control. Trump's threat to wipe out a whole civilization raised the possibility that he would go even beyond his earlier warning to attack civilian infrastructure, which violates the laws of war. His post set off nuclear panic and drew condemnation across the political spectrum and fueled open debate about his credibility, morality, and sanity. The president's threat that a whole civilization will die tonight cannot be excused away as an attempt to gain leverage in negotiations with Iran, Sen. Lisa Murkowski said in a statement on Tuesday. This type of rhetoric is an affront to the ideals our nation has sought to uphold and promote around the world for nearly 250 years. It undermines our long-standing role as a global beacon of freedom and directly endangers Americans both abroad and at home. In addition to criticism from supporters who said they voted against new wars, Trump also faced backlash from war hawks who suspect Iran of playing Trump for time. This offer from the Muslim country of Pakistan is another worthless, dangerous delaying tactic that Iran is famous for, Morton Klein, the president of the Zionist Organization of America and a Trump supporter, said on Tuesday. The U.S. dare not delay any further.
Israel backs US Iran ceasefire but Netanyahu's war goals remain unfulfilled. When Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the start of the Israeli-US military campaign against Iran at the end of February, he was bullish. But the tone of the statement from his office acknowledging the ceasefire announced overnight was far more muted and made clear the decision was made by President Donald Trump. There was also a marked contrast with the triumphal statements from the US and Iran, both of which claimed major victories after 5 weeks of war. In remarks broadcast on Wednesday night, Netanyahu characterized the operation as a success, but said the ceasefire was not the end and that Israel had more goals to achieve, either by agreement or renewing the fighting. Where does the war leave Israel and its prime minister? Shira Efron, the Israel policy chair at the US-based RAND Corporation, said that Netanyahu promised Israelis that this campaign would lead to the end of the Islamic regime, that by cutting the head of the snake, this war would remove an existential threat from Israel. Yet, the snake turned into a hydra. She said the war was a hard sell to the Israeli public because there had been no regime change in Iran, the Iranians still had enriched uranium, and the Iranian missile threat remained. Bowen, ceasefire means respite for civilians, but it might not last long. The ceasefire, first and foremost, is a respite for all those civilians across the Middle East who have been under fire since the United States and Israel went to war against Iran on February 28. They do not include the people of Lebanon. After insisting that the ceasefire did not apply to Lebanon, Israel launched a huge and deadly wave of airstrikes. The U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance described the ceasefire as a fragile truce. That is a realistic assessment. Less realistic claims are coming from both sides, as simultaneously they claim victory. The U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told journalists at the Pentagon that it was a capital V military victory for the United States, historic and overwhelming. The world's leading state sponsor of terrorism proved utterly incapable of defending itself, its people or its territory, he said. Equally bombastic claims are coming from Tehran, where the regime is also claiming an overwhelming victory. Iran's first vice president, Mohammad Reza Aref, said on social media that the world has welcomed a new center of power, and the era of Iran has begun. Trump's supporters say that the undeniably serious destruction inflicted on Iran by the US and Israel forced it to negotiate. The president's supporters say his statements were decisive negotiating tactics. His threats included acts that sounded very much as if they could have amounted to war crimes and crimes against humanity. The BBC reports that pop star Chappelle Roan has faced backlash after clarifying her stance on the US election. While criticizing the Biden administration's policies, particularly regarding Gaza and trans rights, she refused to endorse Kamala Harris. Roan defended her position as questioning authority, despite acknowledging she would vote for Harris.
Israel unhappy, says US kept it in dark on ceasefire deal with Iran until end. The US and Iran announced a 2-week ceasefire, with 90 minutes on Donald Trump's "a whole civilization will die tonight" clock, early Wednesday. As part of which Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, potentially restoring global energy supplies. Israel is unhappy with the US-Iran ceasefire deal because it was excluded from the talks, and finalizing it happened without its consultation, the Wall Street Journal reported. The US and Iran announced a 2-week ceasefire, with 90 minutes on Donald Trump's "a whole civilization will die tonight" clock, early Wednesday. As part of which Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, potentially restoring global energy supplies. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly shown support for the United States' decision for a ceasefire with Iran but said that it does not include Lebanon. Israel supports President Trump's decision to suspend strikes against Iran for 2 weeks subject to Iran immediately opening the straits and stopping all attacks on the US, Israel and countries in the region, Netanyahu wrote on X. However, in a separate post, he stated, "The United States has told Israel that it is committed to achieving these goals, shares by the US, Israel and Israel's regional allies, in the upcoming negotiations." The 2-week ceasefire does not include Lebanon. Israel continued military operations in Lebanon and against Hezbollah, killing 89 and wounding 722, which has prompted protests from Iran. Now, Iran has threatened to withdraw from the ceasefire with the US if Israel continues to attack Lebanon. Israel is reportedly dissatisfied after being excluded from the final negotiations of a 2-week ceasefire deal between the US and Iran. While Prime Minister Netanyahu officially backed the truce, internal reports indicate frustration over being kept in the dark by the Trump administration until the agreement was finalized. Israel launches heaviest ever strikes on Lebanon, killing more than 250 people and injuring over 1,000. The strikes came just hours after a 2-week truce between the US and Iran was announced, which the Israeli Prime Minister insisted did not include Lebanon. Speaking to The Independent, Israeli military spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Nadav Shozhani said the military was following those orders, bombing dozens of targets, including Hezbollah and Iranian military infrastructure. In Lebanon, we are continuing our operations against Hezbollah. That's the current situation right now, in the current guidance we've received, he said. We have different plans for different scenarios. As of now, the mission remains to push back and keep degrading it. Israel has launched its largest wave of strikes on Lebanon in the war so far, in a ring of fire that has killed more than 250 people and crushed hopes of a ceasefire. Just hours after Pakistan announced a 2-week truce in the region between the US and Iran, massive explosions rained down on Lebanon's capital, Beirut, eviscerating buildings and sending towering plumes of smoke across the skyline. The Israeli military said it had hit 100 targets in just 10 minutes. Including military infrastructure for Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, densely packed residential neighborhoods in the capital, the Bekaa Valley to the east and the already devastated south. Witnesses and the wounded described the ring of fire, as civilians, smeared in blood, were shuttled to hospital on the back of motorcycles and first responders dug desperately through the rubble. Veteran surgeons in overwhelmed hospitals called it an absolute massacre. In total, the bombings killed at least 254 people and injured more than 1,160 others across the country, according to Lebanon's civil defense. US says Lebanon not part of ceasefire deal, Iran says it is. Donald Trump has said Lebanon is not part of the two-week ceasefire deal that was agreed overnight. Israel launched a massive wave of strikes on Lebanon after the deal was announced. The ministry added that 890 people had been wounded. A figure from the Lebanese Civil Defense Service earlier put the death toll at 254. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam announced late on Wednesday that Thursday would be a day of mourning for all those who were killed. Trump has said Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire deal, calling it a separate skirmish. Iran has said it will unilaterally end the ceasefire if Israeli attacks continue against Lebanon. Trump says he has agreed to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that the U.S. has achieved a historic and overwhelming victory on the battlefield. Iran's Supreme National Security Council has reportedly accepted the 2-week ceasefire. The agreement hinges on Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz. World leaders and global markets have welcomed the news of the truce. The ceasefire deal comes after Trump had escalated his rhetoric towards Iran, warning Tuesday that a whole civilization would die unless Tehran reopened the crucial waterway. US-Iran talks set to begin in Pakistan on Friday. Israel strikes Lebanon after saying the ceasefire deal doesn't include Lebanon. Iran shuts Hormuz as Israel strikes Lebanon with 100 missiles, killing 250. Less than 24 hours after U.S. President Donald Trump announced a ceasefire with Iran, the Islamic Republic has closed the Strait of Hormuz in response to Israeli attacks on Lebanon, the Associated Press reported, citing local media. The US and Iran announced a 2-week ceasefire early Wednesday, as part of which Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, potentially restoring global energy supplies. However, the Israeli military launched more than 100 airstrikes within a 10-minute window in Lebanon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has publicly shown support for the United States' decision for a ceasefire with Iran but said that it does not include Lebanon. Israel supports President Trump's decision to suspend strikes against Iran for 2 weeks subject to Iran immediately opening the straits and stopping all attacks on the U.S., Israel and countries in the region, Netanyahu wrote on X. Trump, earlier today, backed Israel's ongoing military operation in Lebanon, stating that Hezbollah was not included in the recent ceasefire deal between Washington and Tehran, which halted the conflict in West Asia for 2 weeks. Speaking to PBS News, when asked about Lebanon still being targeted despite the ceasefire announcement, Trump said, "Yeah, they were not included in the deal." When pressed on why Israeli military action in Lebanon was excluded from the deal, Trump replied, "Because of Hezbollah. They were not included in the deal. That'll get taken care of too. It's all right." Asked if he was okay with Israeli forces continuing strikes in Lebanon, Trump told PBS News, "It's part of the deal, everyone knows that. That's a separate skirmish." The United States said Wednesday that Iran must open the Strait of Hormuz immediately, quickly, and safely after reports that the strategic waterway had been shut down despite the US-Iran ceasefire. "Any closure is completely unacceptable," White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters. "I will reiterate the president's expectation and demand that the Strait of Hormuz is reopened immediately, quickly and safely." Oil refinery in Iran struck despite ceasefire, Tehran strikes Kuwait, UAE. The attack occurred despite a ceasefire agreement announced on Tuesday between the United States and Iran. The truce was reached in an 11th-hour effort to prevent the all-out destruction that U.S. President Donald Trump had threatened. The newly brokered ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran has been severely tested by a series of retaliatory strikes across the Persian Gulf. Following an attack on Iran's Lavan Island oil refinery, Tehran launched missile and drone strikes against Kuwait and the UAE, causing significant damage to critical infrastructure and power stations. These escalations, occurring just hours after President Trump announced the truce, have raised serious doubts about the stability of the agreement and the safety of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran, the US and Israel had agreed to the 2-week ceasefire, which allowed President Trump to step back from his warnings of a bombing campaign that would destroy Iranian civilization. Yet attacks resumed on Wednesday not only in Iran but also in Gulf Arab countries. U.S. President Trump described the deal as a total and complete victory for Washington in comments to AFP. He said the United States would suspend attacks on Iran for 2 weeks. In return, Tehran would temporarily reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a critical waterway for global oil supplies. In a post on Truth Social, Trump stated that Tehran had agreed to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. president also told AFP that Iran's enriched uranium would be perfectly taken care of during the truce period. Trump has justified the original military action by claiming that Tehran was enriching uranium with the aim of building an atomic weapon. The United Nations nuclear watchdog has not supported that assertion, and Iran has denied it. In an earlier plan to end hostilities that Iran rejected, the United States had demanded that Tehran halt further enrichment, accept limits on its missile program and stop supporting militant groups in the region. Those specific requirements were not set out in the terms of the latest ceasefire. Trump has shifted his position on ending the conflict several times. Last month he said Iran's unconditional surrender was the only acceptable outcome.
I'll be available at the back for any further questions, but for now, thank you, ciao for now.